It was a typical Tuesday afternoon at Merlin Networks, and the office buzzed with the usual blend of chatter and keyboard clicks. The clock showed a little past 2, and the sun slanted lazily through the tall windows. Employees meandered back to their desks, their post-lunch energy levels slowly rekindling. Suddenly, the door swung open, and in walked Ben Thompson, their charismatic project manager, returning from a client meeting. "Afternoon, everyone. I'm back," he announced cheerfully, shaking a small brown bag for everyone to see. "Yay, you're back," chimed Rachel from accounting, barely looking up from her spreadsheet. Ben was one of those guys you couldn't help but like. His enthusiasm was infectious, even if it came with a dose of chaos. "Guess what the client gave me?" Ben grinned, pulling out a handful of fortune cookies, the kind you'd get after a takeout meal. "Tada! Freebies! The client's giving these out as part of their promotion. Everyone take some." As Ben passed around the cookies, the office mood lightened. But amidst the shared smiles, a question suddenly surfaced. "Hey, where's Hale?" asked John, glancing around. "He went out for a smoke 2 hours ago." The mood shifted. 2 hours ago? The man practically vanished like a ghost. It was common knowledge that Hale Harper, the brooding, enigmatic tech genius, had a unique relationship with the concept of office hours. He would disappear for hours, sometimes even days, only to reappear with a solution to whatever complex issue had been bothering them. Ben's face contorted in a mix of exasperation and concern. 2 hours? Again? He ruffled his hair, and though his tone was light, there was a frustration that was hard to miss. Meanwhile, in a dim alleyway far removed from the polished corridors of the office, Hale leaned against a brick wall, the smell of damp asphalt mixing with the cigarette smoke curling around his fingers. His eyes were cold, but his mind was alert. He wasn't out here just for a smoke. No, something darker was afoot. Across from him, a group of rough-looking men circled a trembling figure. The man, thin and drenched in sweat, pleaded for his life, his voice barely a whisper. "Please, I'll do anything." The leader, a tattooed man with a grin that didn't reach his eyes, laughed. "Anything? Well, aren't you generous? But we're more interested in that Rh-negative liver and heart of yours." Panic gripped the man, and Hale watched silently from the shadows, his cigarette burning low. He wasn't one for heroics, but he had a job to do. His real purpose was far more calculated than saving lives. The group laughed, but Hale's patience was wearing thin. He took one last drag, then flicked the cigarette away. Without warning, he stepped forward. "What the F***CK do you think you're doing?" His voice was icy, a blade in the air. The group turned, startled, but before they could react, Hale was on them, swift and brutal. The fight was over in seconds. The tattooed leader gasped for air as Hale grabbed him by the collar, pinning him against the wall. "The drug," Hale growled. "The one you're smuggling into the underground storehouse. What's the code to the safe?" The man stammered, barely able to speak through the chokehold. "TH3 506 78001. Hale dropped him without a second glance, the man crumpling to the ground, gasping for breath. As the criminal groaned in pain, Hale turned away, his mission complete. Back at Merlin Networks, the air was thick with tension. Ben paced the floor, his frustration mounting. "Where the hell is Hale?" he muttered. He loved the guy, respected his skills even more, but this was getting ridiculous. It wasn't like Hale to be this unreliable. Just as Ben prepared to send someone to check on him, the door swung open again. Hale strode in, as if nothing had happened, his expression calm, maybe even indifferent. "Hale!" Ben exclaimed. "Do you have any idea what time it is? Where have you been all morning?" "I went out for a smoke," Hale said, his voice flat, not offering any more details. Ben blinked. "You can't be serious. You've been gone for hours." "I'm going for another one," Hale said, ignoring the shocked looks from the team as he turned on his heel and headed back out. "Why don't you just fire that jerk?" Rachel muttered under her breath. Ben sighed, watching Hale walk away. "Because he's too damn good at what he does." The office fell silent again, everyone returning to their work, but the air was thick with unspoken thoughts. Hale Harper wasn't just a maverick. He was a mystery wrapped in an enigma, with secrets that stretched far beyond the office walls. The city was a labyrinth of shadows, a place where the lines between right and wrong blurred until they were indistinguishable. It had become a breeding ground for crime, ruled by ruthless cartels that trafficked in drugs, organs, and human lives. At first glance, everything seemed normal, the daily rush of people, the hum of business. But underneath, an empire of depravity thrived, pulling innocents into its clutches, feeding off their desperation. To Hale Harper, this wasn't news. He had seen it all. The addicts who became criminals, the once innocent souls now enslaved by their own choices. He knew the grim reality. He had felt the sting of it. The war wasn't new either. Authorities struggled to hold the city together with flimsy laws, but the cartels were too smart, too quick. They never struck first, and without evidence, the law's hands were tied. The only way to win was to fight dirty, just like the cartels. And that's where the SCU, the Special Covert Unit, came in. SCU wasn't just another task force. It was unofficial, untraceable, and led by people with personal vendettas. Every agent had lost something to the cartels: families, friends, pieces of themselves. Revenge drove them harder than duty ever could. They weren't there to bring criminals to justice. They were there to annihilate them. Hale had been recruited because of his unorthodox methods. He was a ghost, always disappearing, always moving in the shadows, but getting results no one else could. The SCU didn't care about his attitude or lack of cooperation with his day job at Merlin Networks. They needed someone ruthless, someone who understood the stakes. In a dimly lit office on the other side of town, a man in a crisp suit stood before a group of high-ranking officials. "Mayor, Governor, Mr. President," he began, his voice smooth and steady. "The situation in our city is critical. Criminal cartels have infiltrated every corner, trafficking drugs, organs, and people. If we don't act now, this city will fall into ruin." The officials exchanged uneasy glances. They knew the truth of his words, but were too bound by the system to act with the force that was needed. "I propose we create a covert task force. SCU. These agents are hungry for revenge, for justice. We supply them with what they need, off the books, of course. They'll strike where the law can't." One of the officials raised an eyebrow. "And what if they fail?" "They won't," the man replied, confident. "Failure is not an option for them. They've already lost too much to let that happen." Meanwhile, in an old, unmarked building on the outskirts of the city, Hale sat across from a man whose face was half hidden in shadows. A carton of cigarettes lay on the table between them. "I figured you'd want these," the man said, sliding the carton across to Hale. "It's a better brand than the ones you're always complaining about." Hale took the carton, twirling a cigarette between his fingers. The strong, smoky scent wafted into the air. He wasn't one to care much for luxuries, but there was something about the gesture that reminded him of the fleeting moments of calm he used to savor. "I've also got the coordinates," the man added, his tone casual. "No need," Hale replied without looking up. "I already know." The man leaned back in his chair, watching Hale. "You should be careful. You're not invincible." Hale shrugged. "Who knows when I'll bite the dust?" He lit the cigarette, letting the smoke curl around him, defiant against the warning. "But thanks for the concern." As Hale walked out of the building, the man watched him leave, a strange sadness in his eyes. "He's not coming back, is he?" he muttered to himself. Back at Merlin Networks, chaos was brewing. Maureen, the office manager, was pacing, her frustration building to a boiling point. Hale had disappeared again, and this time, she had had enough. "I'm firing him. That's it," she shouted, throwing her hands up in the air. "I don't care if he's good-looking or the best at his job. I can't work with someone like him." But deep down, she knew she wouldn't. Hale was too valuable, too irreplaceable. No one else could do what he did, and it drove her crazy. Just then, her phone rang, snapping her out of her tirade. "Hello? This is Maureen." On the other end of the line was Jaden, the bumbling new recruit. Sorry. I was supposed to meet with clients today, but, I lost the file with all their information." Maureen groaned. "You what? You didn't call anyone?" "I was too flustered," Jaden admitted sheepishly. "But don't hate me. I'm really trying my best. You're lucky I don't want to kill you right now," Maureen muttered under her breath. pinching the bridge of her nose. Meanwhile, in the dark corners of the city, a name whispered in fear reached Hale's ears. Ricky the cartel's deadliest hitman. He had never failed a target. Rumor had it that even the mention of his name sent criminals into hiding. Hale wasn't one to be easily shaken, but the mere fact that Ricky was involved meant things were going to get ugly. Hale's path was becoming clearer by the day. Every step brought him closer to the heart of the cartel, to the people who had turned the city into a cesspool of crime. He was a man on a mission, one cigarette at a time, and no one, not the law, not the cartels, not even his own demons, could stop him. And then, as if by some cruel twist of fate, he appeared, just as someone had wished him into existence. Hale stepped into the light, his cold eyes scanning the scene, the smoke from his cigarette curling like a ghost around him. Hale. Hale Harper stepped out of the alley, his face streaked with blood, his expression colder than winter's wind. A woman's voice echoed faintly behind him, trembling with shock. Hale, your face is bleeding. He wiped the blood with the back of his hand and glanced at her briefly, disinterested. It's not my blood, he muttered, his voice distant, hollow. This was just another night in the mess of his life. The alley was dark, lit only by the faint glow of a distant street lamp. Hale could feel the weight of eyes on him, a bystander who had wandered too close to something they shouldn't have seen. She was just another complication in a day that had already spiraled out of control. His shoulders sagged under the weight of the world, frustration clawing at him from within. What a shit day I'm having, he murmured to himself, rubbing his temples. The throbbing ache in his head was relentless, and the blood on his face stung as it dried. That guy, the woman stammered, her voice wavering. He's hurt. Maybe we should call an ambulance. Her words were cut off by the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. It echoed through the narrow alley, sharp and final. Hale didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. The woman's eyes widened in horror. Is that a gun? Did you just kill someone? Her voice cracked, barely a whisper. Panic rushed over her face as she realized what had just unfolded before her. Hale turned to face her, his gaze piercing through her like a blade. Her breath hitched. She recognized him. This was the man she worked with, the quiet guy from the office, the one who always kept to himself. But the man standing before her now, with blood on his face and a gun in his hand, wasn't the Hale she thought she knew. This man was a stranger. Let go of me, she shrieked, stumbling backward as he took a step toward her. He did not come any closer. I didn't see anything. But Hale's eyes were cold, unforgiving. Yes, you did. Her heart pounded in her chest, her mind spinning. I swear, I won't tell anyone, she pleaded. I'll forget everything I saw. Please, Hale, I don't want to die like this. Hale stared at her, the weight of her words slowly sinking in. Is this really how I die? She thought, her mind racing. In a dingy back alley, killed by someone I thought was my colleague? She felt tears stinging her eyes, her breath shallow and rapid. We were on good terms, weren't we? Please don't kill me, she begged, her voice cracking as she realized how close she was to the edge of her life. Her body shook, and she sank to the ground, clutching at any hope she could find. For a long moment, there was only silence, thick and suffocating. Then Hale sighed, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. He glanced at her one last time before speaking, his voice low and resigned. Fine, he said. I'll give you one chance. Relief flooded through her as she scrambled to her feet. Why, yes, of course. I'll be going then. Hale didn't say anything as she darted down the alley, her footsteps echoing off the brick walls. For a moment, he simply stood there, his mind a haze of exhaustion and frustration. His thoughts drifted to the days when he could still pretend to be normal, to be like everyone else. But that had been a long time ago. Meanwhile, Maureen was pacing frantically outside the office, her phone in hand, trying to reach someone who would pick up. Where is she? She muttered under her breath. She's not even answering her phone. Her frustration only grew when Jaden, the new recruit, came trotting up with a corn dog in hand. Maureen, I was looking all over for you, he said, oblivious to her anxiety. She let out a long breath, her heart still racing from everything she had witnessed. "Thank you, Jaden. Thank you so much," she mumbled, her voice distant as her thoughts churned. "You can have my corn dog." Jaden blinked in confusion, looking down at his snack and then back at Marine. Okay, cool." He grinned, clueless to the chaos unraveling around him. But Marine wasn't hungry. She couldn't be, not after what she'd just seen. Hale, the name alone, made her stomach twist. She had just witnessed him do something that shattered every image she had of him. He was supposed to be a colleague, a quiet guy who did his job well. How could he be this monster? Inside the office, Hale was working, his face calm, composed. His hands moved efficiently over the keyboard as if nothing had happened. He was focused, unbothered by the events of the last hour. "I found the data on the missing clients," he announced, his voice as casual as ever. "I emailed it to you." Marine stared at him, her heart still pounding in her chest. Thank you," she stammered. "He's so competent, so terrifying. How could he switch between being the best at his job and whatever had just happened in that alley?" Hale looked up at her, his eyes dark, unreadable. "I had a backup of everything you uploaded last week," he said, explaining how he'd managed to find the data she had lost. "A backup?" Without waiting for a response, Hale stood up, reaching into his pocket for a cigarette. "I'm going out for a smoke." Marine flinched. Why, yes, of course. "Be my guest," she stammered, watching him as he walked out, her pulse still racing. As soon as he was gone, Marine knew what she had to do. Run now was her chance. She couldn't be here when he came back. She had to escape before she got pulled deeper into whatever dark world Hale was tangled in. At home, Marine locked the door and windows, her heart pounding as she leaned against the wall. Safe, at least for now. But her mind wouldn't stop racing. What in the world is going on? She tried to make sense of it all. Hale, the blood, the gunshot. He had always been so hard to read, always distant, but she had never thought he was capable of something like this. "I am a bad person," she whispered to herself, her voice shaking. But was Hale worse? Or was he just the only one brave enough to act on it? Asterisk, asterisk. The answer felt too heavy to hold. Marine Lane paced the small room, her heart hammering in her chest, her thoughts racing. She couldn't make sense of what was happening. She had been so close to death, asterisk, asterisk, so close, asterisk, asterisk. And now, Hale stood before her, his face as unreadable as ever, his words hanging in the air like a noose. Yes. His voice was cold, detached, like he was discussing the weather. Marine stared at him, her throat dry. "What happens if I'm spotted by a civilian?" she asked, her voice shaky, unsure if she even wanted the answer. Hale's brow furrowed slightly. He tilted his head, the hint of confusion passing over his face before it disappeared, replaced by the familiar mask of indifference. "It's not like you to make a mistake. But this wasn't about a mistake. This was about survival, about the unspoken threats she felt pressing down on her like a weight." Hale turned his back to her, his voice low, almost casual. "Well, I'm afraid. Sacrifices must be made for the greater good. Eliminate them." His words, spoken with such calm finality, sent a shiver down Marine's spine. Her stomach lurched. "Even if it's Marine Lane," she whispered, the tremor in her voice betraying her fear. He turned slowly, his gaze meeting hers with a chilling calm. "You," he said with a thin smile, "you said you wouldn't kill me." Her voice was panicked now, rising, desperate. Marine's knees felt weak. This was it. Asterisk, asterisk, this was the moment, asterisk, asterisk. But Hale's eyes softened, just a little. "Who said anything about killing you?" Marine blinked, her mind struggling to catch up. "Ichi's not going to kill me," she thought, disbelief washing over her. "Am I really in the clear?" Hale stood there, looking at her with that same calm, unreadable expression. For the briefest of moments, she thought she might have a chance, that she might survive this. Think, she began to stammer, relief flooding her voice. But her relief was short-lived. Hale held up her house keys, dangling them in front of her like a prize. Marine's eyes widened. "Wait, those are my house keys," she exclaimed, her voice high and panicked again. Hale's smile turned cold. "I'm going to live with you," he said simply. Marine's world spun. What? I have to keep an eye on you, Hale continued, like it was the most natural thing in the world. You have a spare room here, don't you? WHWH, Marine stuttered, her thoughts crashing into each other, unable to form a coherent response. What are you talking about? How does that make any sense? Her voice cracked as panic took over. Absolutely not. This is where I live. Hale shrugged, completely unfazed by her outburst. Well, all right. I'm not stopping you from choosing death instead. His words were flat, almost bored, as if her life meant nothing more than a small inconvenience. Marine froze. Death? Was that really the alternative? She swallowed hard, her mind spinning. Has he spared me? Or doomed me? Her breath came in shallow, rapid bursts as she considered her options. A spare room? She didn't have a spare room, but she couldn't say that. Asterisk, asterisk, could she? Asterisk, asterisk. W.H. she called after him, her voice weak and trembling. It's more of a storage space than a spare room, but... Her voice trailed off as Hale glanced at her, his expression as indifferent as ever. Marine's thoughts spiraled. My life isn't what it used to be. Every day felt like a grind. Working her ass off, doing whatever they wanted her to do, but what did she get in return? Nothing. She clenched her fists, frustration bubbling beneath the surface. Her mind wandered to Peter, the one person who might have helped her. But where the hell had he disappeared to? Marine cursed under her breath, feeling utterly alone. FCK my life, asterisk, asterisk. Meanwhile, outside, Hale was already lighting a cigarette, standing near a black sedan parked on the curb. His driver, Ricky, glanced at him through the rearview mirror, his face tight with the weight of unspoken thoughts. I understand what you mean, sir, Ricky ventured carefully, sensing the tension in the air. Hale's eyes narrowed, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. Are you King kidding me? What the hell would you know? His voice was sharp, cutting. All you do is drive. Don't act like you understand, you piece of shit. Ricky's jaw tightened, but his tone remained steady. I may only be a driver, sir, but I spent the past decade working for HEPA. So I understand what it is that you miss. There was a long, pregnant pause. Hale's gaze drifted as he exhaled a cloud of smoke. In the old days, HEPA was much better. His voice trailed off, as if lost in thought. Was it better? Ricky asked softly, knowing the answer wasn't simple. Hale's face darkened, a distant look in his eyes. He glanced down at his phone, a message flashing across the screen. Alpha next to your target. Execute, asterisk, asterisk. Hale's expression hardened as he closed his eyes briefly, as if contemplating something far bigger than himself. Back at Marine's apartment, she worked frantically, turning the cluttered storage room into something that could pass as a living space. It was a small, cramped space, filled with boxes and old furniture, but she had to make it work. If she didn't, well, death wasn't exactly off the table. Marine wiped the sweat from her brow, stepping back to look at the room. It wasn't perfect, but it was clean. Clean enough, she hoped, for Hale not to kill her over it. Phew, she sighed, exhausted. But the question still lingered in her mind. When is he coming home? Her stomach twisted at the thought. Is he even coming back today? Marine stood there, staring at the empty room, her mind racing. She felt like a prisoner in her own home, trapped between life and death, with Hale as her unpredictable captor. And there was no telling what tomorrow would bring. Mr. Ricky stood with his arms crossed, his face set in a hard expression as Johnson, a former colleague, pleaded with him for mercy. Johnson's voice cracked as he spoke, desperation seeping through every word. Mr. Ricky, please just hear me out. Johnson's voice trembled, fear shaking his words. I didn't have any other choice. I have a family to take care of. Ricky's eyes narrowed. Family. It was always family, wasn't it? He had heard this excuse too many times, but something inside him still listened. The guilt, the humanity he tried to bury deep inside, still flickered to life at the mention of loved ones. But that flicker was weak now, dulled by years of betrayal and violence. No one to look after them if I die, Johnson continued, his voice growing more desperate. They threatened to hurt my family, so I... Ricky's cold eyes never left Johnson's face as he interrupted. What about Doutzen? You knew she'd be killed if you took her there. Ricky's voice was ice, and Johnson flinched at the name. Doubtson. A woman who had trusted Johnson, believed in him. And now she was dead. Johnson stammered, grasping for some kind of defense. I mean, how could I not? As you said yourself, I spent the past decade working for HEPA. I know how things work. Ricky stepped closer, towering over Johnson. His voice was low, but the threat was unmistakable. Yes, but Miss Doubtson is just one person, Johnson whispered. But my family, there's 5 of us. Ricky's jaw tightened. So what? Should you have sacrificed 5 lives to save one? He spat the words at Johnson, but beneath the venom was a glimmer of something darker. A pain he kept hidden, something that made this personal. Johnson's face crumpled. He was trapped like a rat in a cage, but still, he tried to reason, to beg. Please, Mr. Ricky. You're still young. You can always meet someone new. Ricky laughed then, a sound devoid of any warmth. Someone new, he sneered. That's the most hilarious thing I've heard all year. Johnson's knees buckled as Ricky took another step forward, his shadow casting over the trembling man. Johnson's breath came in gasps, and he looked up with wide, pleading eyes. Please, dear God, he whimpered. Ricky tilted his head, his eyes dark and unreadable. I appreciate the concern, Johnson, he said, his voice softer now, almost mocking. Maybe in return, I'll give you a chance to live. Johnson blinked in disbelief, his heart leaping in his chest. Was this it? His chance to survive? Ricky smirked and stepped back, drawing an invisible line on the ground with his shoe. I won't step foot over this line, he said casually. Make a run for it. If your actions are really justifiable, I'm sure God will be on your side. Johnson froze, his eyes darting to the line on the ground. He swallowed hard. The promise of life dangled before him, but it felt more like a trap. Johnson's voice broke as he screamed, I did nothing wrong. I'm innocent. Ricky just laughed, his dark eyes glittering with something close to amusement. Run, he whispered. Elsewhere, Hale stood in a dimly lit office, his broad frame casting long shadows across the walls. He wasn't supposed to be here, not at this hour, but he had unfinished business. He stared down at the phone in his hand, the text from HEPA still glaring back at him. A new executive. A female one, no less. It didn't make sense. What are you doing here at this hour? A voice startled him from behind. It was Jaden, one of his co-workers. Jaden glanced around nervously, clearly uncomfortable with Hale's presence. Hale's expression was unreadable. Is there something I don't know about? He asked, his voice quiet but laced with an underlying intensity. Jaden stammered, confused. Why? What do you mean? I heard HEPA has a new exec. Hale replied, his eyes narrowing slightly. A female exec. Jaden looked around, clearly out of his depth. I was instructed to give you a specific mission if you ever asked about her. Hale's patience was wearing thin. He stepped closer, his voice low. I don't understand. HEPA's an exclusive family business. The administration's made up of purely blood relatives, and as far as I know, none of their female relatives survived the last power struggle. Right? Jaden nodded quickly. We just found out too. Management is looking into it, but it's going to take some time since this is a first for everyone. Hale stared at him, his mind racing. Something didn't add up. In the meantime, Jaden continued, they got a job for you. Though it's about rescuing someone. The word hit Hale like a punch to the gut. Rescue? Hale flinched at the absurdity of the idea. Me? Rescuing someone? Asterisk, asterisk. No, thanks, Hale muttered, turning away. Jaden cleared his throat nervously. In that case, I'm supposed to tell you there won't be any initial. Hale waved him off, cutting him short. They gave me a job I can't possibly do. I've only ever killed people, never saved a soul. His voice was bitter, resigned to the role he had been cast in for so long. Later that evening, Maureen sat in her cramped apartment, waiting for something, anything to make sense. The room she had cleaned for Hale was still empty. Would he come back? Was this her new reality? Living in fear of the man who had just spared her life? Her thoughts were interrupted when the door creaked open. Hale had returned, his expression blank, but something about him seemed off. She didn't dare speak as he dropped a file on her cluttered desk. Without a word, he turned toward the door again. "Are you going somewhere?" Marine asked, her voice barely a whisper. Hale didn't look back as he stepped into the hallway, his voice cold and detached. "Work." Marine's stomach twisted. Work, it was always work with him. A few hours earlier, Hale had been at the office. The usual chaos swirled around him. Phones ringing, voices overlapping, the constant hum of machinery. He was used to it. His life had long been reduced to tasks, orders, and the odd moments of tension. "Hey, Hale, can you order some more coffee?" "We're all out," came a voice from across the room. "Sure," Hale replied automatically, barely looking up from his desk. He was used to being the go-to guy, the one people turned to for the small stuff like coffee orders and phone calls. "Hale, can you get the phone?" Another voice chimed in. Again, the same reflexive response. "Sure." He didn't even think about it. It was easier to just do what they asked. He picked up the phone, greeted the caller with a robotic hello. Merlin Networks. His mind was elsewhere, though preoccupied with the weight of the day's work and something darker gnawing at the back of his thoughts. Back in the present, Hale's mind drifted. His co-worker, Maureen Lane, stood near his desk, trying to help, but Hale wasn't in the mood. He felt a frustration bubbling beneath the surface, one he couldn't quite explain. "Ms. Lane, this is my work," he said, his tone more irritated than he intended. Maureen flinched slightly, her attempt to help now feeling like a mistake. "Oh, I was only trying to help," she murmured. She wasn't sure why Hale was angry. He always seemed so distant, so controlled, and now he was lashing out over something as simple as paperwork. Jaden, another colleague, stepped in, oblivious to the tension between them. "Why didn't you just let her do it?" he asked Hale. She offered. Hale shot Jaden a hard look, but Jaden just shrugged. "Wow, thanks." Jaden continued, not catching the subtle storm brewing in Hale's expression. "Does it feel good dumping your work on other people so you can slack off?" Hale spat, barely containing his anger. Jaden's jaw dropped. "What? You say that like you do all the work around here when really, you don't do squat either." He scoffed, clearly offended. "The nerve! I can't even." Hale closed his eyes, exhaling sharply. He couldn't believe the idiocy around him sometimes. Act natural, he told himself. Just act natural, but that was easier said than done. Every nerve in his body felt frayed, pulled taut by the constant stress of the life he led. For years, Hale had walked a dark path, one he couldn't easily escape. The memories flooded back. Last week, the week before that, and even long before he started working for Merlin Networks. He had been a killer, a cold, efficient, unfeeling assassin who'd taken countless lives without hesitation. He looked up at Maureen, who stood awkwardly by his desk. For the longest time, Hale muttered, his voice distant. "On countless occasions, I've killed people." Maureen blinked, unsure how to respond. "Gee, good for you," she stammered awkwardly. Hale stared at her, his eyes sharp, like a predator sizing up its prey. "But here I am, sparing your life. Why do you think that is?" Maureen's breath caught in her throat. "Double," she whispered, a chill running down her spine. "If there's a reason?" "What is it?" Hale's expression didn't change. He simply turned away, walking toward the door. "I'm going to bed." "What?" Maureen gasped, her frustration bubbling up. "Aren't you going to finish what you were saying?" "Hale, you can't leave me hanging like this." She chased after him, but he was already out the door, leaving her standing there, confused and rattled. As Hale walked away, his mind churned. Even if it's Maureen Lane, he thought, the order from HEPA echoing in his mind. Yes, take her out. The memory of that command weighed heavily on him. It would have been easy to follow through, to end her life like he had done so many others. But something stopped him. Try to find a way around it. He had been told. What a pain in the neck, he thought bitterly. Was there a reason he spared her? He couldn't even tell. Perhaps it was a fleeting sense of humanity, or maybe something deeper, something buried within him that he didn't dare examine too closely. Meanwhile, Maureen's frustration quickly gave way to determination. She had bigger things to worry about than Hale's cryptic attitude. Life had been throwing her curveballs for a while now, and she wasn't about to let one brooding assassin throw her off course. "I have other life-or-death matters to worry about," she muttered to herself, pacing her tiny apartment. She glanced at the clock. 2 hours had passed since she started waiting for a potential client to call her back. That sounds awful, she thought, shaking her head, but she didn't have time to sulk. She needed to find new clients fast to fill the ever-growing leak in her bucket of work. I'm going to sign a new client on, no matter what it takes, she vowed to herself, her fists clenched in determination. Even if she had to knock on every door in the city, she'd do it. She imagined herself walking through hell, wading through an alligator-infested swamp, if that's what it took to get their final okay. I'll do it. But she had no idea what kind of hell was waiting for her. As she walked through the unfamiliar streets, her eyes landed on a strange, dark building at the end of the block. It loomed over her like a foreboding shadow. What on earth is this place? She thought, her heart skipping a beat as she took a hesitant step closer. Maureen had left earlier that day, determined to meet a potential client. She was always driven, always pushing herself to the brink for Merlin Networks. But Hale had overheard something that made his blood run cold. Is that client based in North Nome? He asked, his voice sharp with concern. Yeah, I think so, his coworker answered casually, unaware of the danger Maureen had just walked into. Hale's heart skipped a beat. North Nome. The name sent a chill down his spine. North Nome was no place for someone like Maureen. It was the city's worst slum, a place where desperation ruled and violence was the law of the land. People like her didn't belong there. When did she leave? Hale asked, his mind racing. Maybe an hour ago. Hale stood frozen for a moment. Should I just leave her? The thought crept in, dark and tempting. If she stayed in North Nome long enough, she'd die without him ever having to lift a finger. He wouldn't have to struggle with the guilt or the decision. She would just disappear. But something held him back. An old voice in his head reminded him of who he was, what he'd done. No one deserves that, not even Maureen. His feet moved before his mind could stop them. He was out the door, headed straight for the slums. Maureen wandered through the filthy streets of North Nome, her nerves on edge. The place was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Broken windows, garbage-strewn alleys, and a haze of despair hung in the air. Where am I? She thought, her heart pounding as she clutched her laptop bag closer to her chest. Suddenly, her body collided with a rough figure. Oh, she gasped, stumbling backward. Oh, miss, did you just hit me? Did ya? The man sneered, stepping closer with a menacing look in his eyes. I am so sorry. Maureen stammered, panic setting in. I was trying to find my way, and I didn't see you. What have you got there, huh? He eyed her bag, hungrily. Looks pretty heavy. It's a laptop, you idiot, another thug chimed in, leering at her. Oh, God. I'm in real trouble, asterisk, Maureen's mind raced, trying to think of an escape. Before the thugs could make a move, a cold, familiar voice cut through the tension. Hale? Maureen's voice cracked in shock. She couldn't believe her eyes. He was there, standing in the shadows like a silent guardian. Hale's expression was as unreadable as ever. Why would you come here alone? He growled, his eyes scanning the crowd that had gathered around her. Maureen barely had time to respond before the thugs lunged. Behind you, she screamed. Hale moved with deadly precision, taking out one of the attackers with a swift blow before turning to face the others. In a matter of seconds, the alley was littered with groaning bodies, and Maureen was left breathless, clinging to her bag. Thank you, Hale, she managed, her voice trembling. I'll call the police. Hale looked around, his eyes cold and dark. The police, he scoffed. Look around you. This is a neighborhood where no one gives a damn, even if you die. Killing and being killed is a way of life here. Maureen swallowed hard. She could see it now, the hopelessness, the danger that hung in the air. But she wasn't about to back down. I have to make it to this meeting, she insisted, her voice shaking but firm. We need this client, Hale. Without it, we won't have enough money to cover payroll this month. If we lose this deal, we're done. Can you help me? Please. Hale stared at her, his face emotionless as ever. He could see the desperation in her eyes, but something else too, determination. She's not doing this because she has a death wish, he realized. She's doing it because she cares. Without a word, Hale followed her. As they reached the building where her meeting was scheduled, Marine rushed in, her heart pounding in her chest. The meeting went better than expected. Marine pitched the company's services with all the energy and passion she had. The clients were intrigued, interested even, as she explained how Merlin Networks could secure their premises with state-of-the-art surveillance systems. They seemed super interested, don't you think? She asked Hale afterward, a smile breaking through the exhaustion. For the first time that day, she felt like she could breathe again. Thank you so much for... I was only doing my job. Hale interrupted, his voice flat. He lit a cigarette and turned to leave. Rusted is just across the street. You go ahead, he added, the cigarette dangling between his lips. Marine hesitated, but before she could finish, a new danger appeared. A gang of men emerged from the shadows, their eyes locked on Hale. Look who just joined the party, one of them sneered. That crazy son of a bitch. Marine's stomach dropped. Oh no. Do any of you know about the new female executive at HEPA? Hale asked, his voice icy. The gang members exchanged glances, their expressions darkening. You're one deranged mother, asterisk, 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 the leader spat. And what if we do? Without another word, the gang moved in. Later that evening, Marine sat at a small restaurant, eating dinner in a state of disbelief. She couldn't shake the events of the day from her mind. Hale had saved her life again. He had swooped in like some kind of superhero, just when she thought all hope was lost. She glanced at him, sitting across the table, as stoic as ever. How did he even know I was there? She wondered. He always seemed to show up just in time, like he was watching over her. And then it hit her, a crazy, ridiculous thought that sent her mind spinning. Wait a minute. Does he have a crush on me? Hale tightened his grip around the man's collar, his face a cold mask of indifference. I ain't know nothing about some new exec, the thug sputtered, eyes wide with fear. Another dead end. Hale released the man, letting him crumple to the ground. So they're not going to give me any more jobs unless I take the rescue mission, he thought with a heavy sigh. He hated these jobs, saving people. It wasn't his nature, not after everything he had done. But he had no choice. There were debts to be paid, and it wasn't like he had a moral high ground to stand on. He dialed a number. Hello, this is Smokey. I'll swing by tomorrow to pick up the smokes, he said, the cigarette in his hand burning low. I'm going to take that rescue job. Are you sure? Smokey asked, a hint of disbelief in his voice. Yeah, what choice do I have? Hale's thoughts were swirling as he made his way back. They expect me to save someone? He almost laughed at the absurdity of it. I've taken more lives than I can remember. Who am I to save anyone? Memories of his past flickered in his mind. Faces he had long forgotten, blood on his hands. I couldn't even save the people I loved, he reminded himself bitterly. The idea of rescuing some stranger was almost comical. It was a twisted joke the universe had played on him. As he walked, he noticed happy people, ordinary lives unfolding around him. A family laughing outside a diner. A couple holding hands on a park bench. It made his insides churn. Why do they get to be happy when all I've known is death? Marine's voice snapped him out of his brooding. Oh, why you're back, she stammered, startled to see him so soon. Marine rushed over to him, holding out a small box. I bought a pair of slippers for you. Feel free to use them. Her cheeks were flushed, and she looked nervous. An odd look on someone so capable. Hale blinked at her, caught off guard. Slippers? He wasn't sure how to respond, but before he could even think, he was slipping them on. Marine's eyes widened in surprise. Didn't expect that from a hitman, did you? Hale thought to himself, a small smirk tugging at his lips. Would you like a hot dog, Hale? She offered, her voice shaky. There's one left. Marine watched him closely. Does he seriously have feelings for me? She wondered. Or is he just being nice? Hale shook his head. No, thank you. It's all yours. Marine frowned, confused. Is he not hungry? Or maybe he just wants me to have all the yummy food. Her mind wandered as she stared at him. He really was handsome in a rugged, dangerous way. But no, that couldn't be it. We live in completely different worlds, Marine. Snap out of it. Just as she was lost in thought, Hale grabbed a bottle off the table. Hale, what do you want with that? Marine stammered as he uncorked the bottle. I'm going to drink it, he replied flatly. All of it? The whole thing? Yes, Hale said, his voice calm as ever. No, seriously? Marine protested. One sip of that stuff, and you're a goner. It's fine, Hale insisted. But Marine was practically beside herself. Wait, Hale, no? That's my super expensive. She watched in horror as Hale downed the liquor without a second thought. What the hell is wrong with this guy? She fumed internally. That was supposed to last me through life's highs and lows. And now he drinks it all like it's water. Asterisk, asterisk. Hale leaned back, letting the burn of the liquor settle in his chest. Rocket fuel, Marine had called it. He didn't care. There was a job to be done, and distractions were the last thing he needed. Do you have the intel? He asked, turning to his contact. The man nodded, handing over a file. The target is HEPA's resident drug chemist. She's the one behind nearly 70% of the national narcotics market. Hale scanned the document, his jaw tightening. Sam Lundquist, a name that had become infamous in the underworld, despite the fact that she was only 15 years old. She's the one churning out those hallucinogens and psychedelics, the man continued. All the new junk that's been flooding the streets? It's her creation. The cartel has kept her locked up in their labs for years, ever since her parents sold her to HEPA. Hale's hand clenched around the file. A 15-year-old genius, trapped in the belly of a beast, creating poison for the world. His gut twisted. How the hell do I rescue someone from that? He took a deep breath, looking out into the night. This job wasn't just another mission, it was personal. Saving Sin wasn't just about redemption. It was about breaking a cycle, about saving someone when no one had saved him. Back at the apartment, Marine's thoughts raced. Does Hale have a crush on me? It seemed ridiculous, but the way he always showed up, the way he saved her, and now he was staying with her, even sharing slippers. Maybe there's more to him than meets the eye. But as she watched him, silently nursing the last drops of her liquor, she realized something. Whatever his reasons, Hale was a mystery she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. 6 months into the job, and Jaden still felt like he was drowning. How did I get here? He thought, staring at his laptop. His inbox was overflowing, and his mind raced with deadlines. There was still so much he didn't understand. Marine said this would get easier, but it hasn't. Hi, Liam. Jaden called out, hoping for some guidance. Liam didn't even look up. Sorry, busy, came the curt reply. Defeated, Jaden turned to Seraphim. Can you help me with the Pith Park Hotel key phone installation? Marine said to ask you if Liam is unavailable. Busy too, Seraphim shot back with a scowl, clearly annoyed at the interruption. Jaden sighed. No one wants to help the rookie, that he felt a sharp pang of resentment. How dare they just dump everything on me? I'm trying, but they treat me like a burden. He glanced at Marine, who was in the middle of a meeting with Mr. Merlin, the CEO of Merlin Networks. She flashed him a reassuring smile. She always had time for him, even if the others didn't. She's an amazing team leader, so calm, so composed. Jaden wished he could be half as confident. Marine waved him over after the meeting. I'll help you after this, she promised. Her voice was kind, but Jaden still felt useless. I just want to be helpful. Why is it so hard? Inside the boardroom, James Merlin addressed his staff with practiced confidence. With the addition of this new client, we've managed to close out the third quarter without any dips in sales, he said, leaning back in his chair. One of the executives looked skeptical. Even after losing DD Corporation, James smiled. Things are actually better than before. We've signed a new client in an untapped neighborhood. Excellent, the exec replied. But, James, I really should have done a better job preparing my... Suddenly, the door burst open. Jaden stood there, wide-eyed and breathless. I must speak with you as a matter of urgency. The room went silent. Mr. Merlin blinked in surprise. Jaden, he said slowly. We're in the middle of a meeting. Jaden, undeterred, blurted out, our team must go on a company retreat. What? Marine gasped, shocked by the outburst. Jaden, what are you doing? Jaden stood firm, eyes pleading. Please, we need this. We've been working non-stop, and I'm exhausted. James Merlin sighed and rubbed his temples, but he couldn't hide a small smile. Oh, Jaden, he thought, looking at his son. You're still such a kid. Later that evening, Jaden nervously handed Maureen a set of tickets. I won these for a resort. It's legit, I swear. Maureen raised an eyebrow, suspicious. 5 tickets? Really? Jaden nodded. I checked. It's real. Paradise Resort. He looked hopeful, but Maureen still hesitated. Then, to everyone's surprise, Hale spoke up. I'll go. His voice was low but firm. Jaden stared at him, stunned. Hale of all people? But then again, Hale was always an enigma. Quiet, mysterious, and always keeping to himself. Maureen was still skeptical, but eventually relented. Fine. I guess a break wouldn't hurt. The day of the retreat arrived, and Jaden could hardly contain his excitement. And we're off, he cheered as they piled into the car. But his excitement was met with groans from the rest of the group. Are we seriously doing this? Seraphim muttered. I've got so much work to do. Maureen sighed from the passenger seat. And why am I the one driving? Jaden, ever optimistic, grinned. Relax. Once we get there, it'll be great. You'll see. But as they drove closer to Paradise Resort, a strange feeling settled over Hale. He stared out the window, the vast, luxurious hotel looming in the distance. This place, he thought, a frown crossing his face. It seemed too perfect, too pristine. It's the ideal front for something darker. The resort was everything its name promised. Lush gardens, crystal blue pools, and sun-drenched terraces. Jaden couldn't stop gushing over the beauty of it all. Wow, look at this place. Even Maureen, who had been skeptical, couldn't deny it. It's stunning, but Hale didn't care about the view. His mind was already elsewhere, searching for answers. Sam Lundquist. The name had been haunting him since the mission began. A child genius, locked away in the resort's hidden labs, producing some of the deadliest drugs on the market. Hale hung back as the others entered the resort. Aren't you coming in? Maureen called to him. No, Hale replied, his gaze distant. You enjoy yourself. Maureen frowned, watching him. What's up with him? He's the one who wanted to come. But Hale didn't answer. He had a job to do, and it wasn't lounging by the pool. Where do I begin? His mind was laser-focused on his mission. The cover of a company retreat would let him blend in, but he knew there wasn't much time. The moment he found San, they would be on the run. Inside one of the resort's hidden laboratories, Sam Lundquist sat hunched over her workstation, her fingers trembling as she mixed chemicals. Her captors watched her with cruel amusement. Lundquist. One of them barked. Get your ass over here. Sam flinched, knocking over a beaker. She scrambled to clean it up, but her hands were shaking too much. Ugh, you idiot, one of the guards muttered, shoving her aside. No idea why they call you a genius. A complete moron, more like. San winced at the insult, her body aching from the constant strain. When will this end? She thought bitterly. Hale's eyes scanned the resort. He pressed his earpiece. The plan is a go, he whispered. The clock was ticking. Where are you? Sam Lundquist.